Good morning YouTube, Flank Hollow here, and since making actual content is just exhausting, I'm gonna make you a list video. My top 10 favorite cartoons as of the recording of this video. But first, here are the honorable mentions in no particular order. Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Gravity Falls, Iron Man Armored Adventures, Teen Titans, We Bare Bears, Spider-Man the Animated Series, Spectacular Spider-Man, Spider-Man Unlimited, Static Shock, and the entire Ben 10 franchise, except for Omniverse because that was a piece of crap. Now on to number 10, Wolverine and the X-Men. Okay, so if the honorable mentions didn't give it away, I am a pretty big superhero fan. Wolverine and the X-Men was the fourth animated adaptation of the X-Men franchise. This one starts off the back with a fully functioning Xavier school and a completely set up X-Men team. But that is cut short after a mysterious explosion happens at the school, leaving Xavier and Jean Grey missing. The team shortly thereafter breaks apart and goes their separate ways. The show basically entails Wolverine as he is trying to reform the team to fight together against the badness in the world. It has a ton of characters, yet it strangely gives each one enough room to breathe, and it tells some stories that make actual sense. Also, fun fact, back when it was airing on television and I had no access to the internet, it had the dumbest release schedule. It started with like 6 or 7 episodes, and then it just stopped for a month, and it started up again, and then it just cuts short, and it just kept doing this sporadic schedule that just left me on the edge of my seat going, when's the next episode? Because I was deep into the story. It was probably the first story that actually just had me just wanting to know more immediately, and I thank it for that. Unfortunately, for reasons I do not personally know, it ended up getting cancelled after the first season despite it being one of Nicktoons' highest rated shows. Nonetheless, it was great while it lasted. Number 9, The Legend of Korra. This one's a bit more recent. It was a sequel to The Last Airbender which, spoiler alert, is higher on the list, set 70 years after the original. It follows Korra, the newest avatar, as she struggles with mastering the elements, discovering herself, and of course fighting a ton of baddies. The first season basically sets up the world and how it works, while also being its own contained thing because at the time they didn't know if they were going to have more seasons. The second season kinda jumped the shark a bit and does some crazier things. Some people really didn't like this season, but personally, even though it was less than the other ones, I still loved it. The third season subtly sets up the fourth season, while still delivering a satisfying story on its own. Keep in mind that the first 3 seasons happen relatively close in the story-wise, but the fourth season actually happens 3 years after the previous. While it did kind of waste a bit of time having to explain all the changes that have happened, it got right back on its way and just kept going and bleh. The final season really wraps up the whole show and just puts it all into perspective. Plus, the final scene of the show really just made me squee. Legitimately, I was so happy. You either do know or will know what I'm talking about. Overall, the show hits the right balance between brilliant action scenes and some clever and not so clever humor, mixed with some mostly likable characters. Number 8, X-Men Evolution. Yeah, I know I already did an X-Men show, but this one's different, calm down. In this one, it actually has many of the characters set as high school age instead of the experienced adults in the most other adaptations. Basically, the team in this one consists of the trainees and the adults. Besides that, it's obviously filled with the whole superhero comedy action mix that just works. But I personally think this one kind of packs a little bit more of a punch. The characters often evoke a lot of emotion. You can just really get swept away with everything that's going on. Its conclusion is also really satisfying as it wraps up the bulk of the show, and it leaves Marvel fans like myself wide-eyed with all the references that they throw in at the end. Fun fact, while this originally aired in the year 2000, it got re-released on Disney XD in like a little midnight package on Saturdays, and I would spend many nights just staying up till like 3 in the morning watching the whole show because it would air it in order, and I felt this is around the time I think I fell in love with the art of like media and storytelling and all that regard. Overall, the show just worked for me in so many levels. Number 7, Archer. Oh, you thought this would only be family-friendly cartoons. Nah, cartoons of all kinds are great. Archer entails the misadventures of international super spy Sterling Archer, who is supposed to be the deadliest agent in the world. And he also happens to be the worst possible human. It's great. The show is really just a cluster of fun and filth. Pretty much every character in the show is a selfish, neurotic piece of crap, yet you just love them. Story-wise, the show actually makes sense. It tells a pretty linear, solid story, but sometimes the most minute of details can sometimes spawn whole arcs, which I think is just fun and clever and great. Really, the show is just well made. Plus, I personally like the animation style myself. The only negative I can get is how vulgar it can be and how that may not appeal to you. Oh, and also how you'll be saying a ton of awful one-liners for a month after you watch it. It is just a ball of a show. Number 6, Avatar: The Last Airbender. There it is, the OG Avatar. So anyone who's anyone knows that Avatar is a great show. It follows the boy Aang and his friends as he goes to master the elements and stop the ever so prevalent Fire Nation. From the creative settings, to the excellently choreographed combat sequences, to the interesting and relatable characters. This show basically hits the nail on the head in almost all regards. It's not really that surprising that it amassed such a great following and got its sequel. On a more personal note, I remember when it would rerun all the episodes and I would catch each one in order, and that's how I watched the show. And then when those trivia bubble marathons happened, I would just be glued to my screen for the entire process of it. It was great. Honestly, it's hard to say anymore, except if you haven't seen it, you should probably see it. Number 5, My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. Okay, I might have just made you angry for it being either too high on the list or too low on the list, but whatever, it's my list. Friendship is Magic is the 4th generation of the My Little Pony franchise, or also known as the good one. It follows Twilight Sparkle and her 6 friends as they learn about friendship through weird, funny, wacky, and surprisingly sometimes intense adventures. I don't know your personal relationship with the show, but it has received quite a large audience, and I think for good reason. You don't ever really walk away from an MLP episode upset. Even at its worst, it's still a little bit decent. And when it's at its best, it's fantastic. Number 4, Young Justice. Okay, for the longest time I always viewed DC in general as the one Marvel is better than. And while I still prefer Marvel, this show really helped me see how great DC could possibly be. Young Justice follows the sidekicks of the Justice League as they try to prove themselves as the heroes that they are while facing numerous threats. It also sets a nice vein of comedy mixed with the drama, and the show actually has some really complex storylines. Of course, there's a noticeable thematic change from Season 1 to Season 2. The second season, or Invasion, starts 5 years after the first. Invasion has an obvious darker tone with some more dramatic elements than the first had shown. I personally think that they both complement each other as a full package to bring it together as just an excellent show. Number 3, Bojack Horseman. This show is set in an alternate universe where anthropomorphic animals and humans live side by side. The story follows Bojack Horseman, a washed-up 90s sitcom actor who is mean, cynical, and of course on top of that, an alcoholic. At first glance when you see the show, you'll probably think that it is some old, raunchy, adult animation like Family Guy. Just a drunk horse yelling obscenities. And while that is still technically present, the show is much more. Each character has their own problems and sins. Each character is in the right sometimes, and also sometimes really deeply in the wrong. Yet they're still easy to relate to. I feel it comments on and just shows the struggles that everyday people can deal with, and even no matter how famous you are, how unhappy you can still be. It also deals with concepts of self-destruction and what I can only assume is depression. But besides the more darker tones, it is also strongly satirical of mainstream media and society as a whole. In that regard, it really takes advantage of the setting being Hollywood. Also, as a small measure for my enthusiasm of the show, when it first aired, I didn't watch it because it didn't look interesting. I kept putting it off, and then I eventually watched the full season. But then when the second season came out, I watched it within 10 minutes of it being put on Netflix. Number 2, Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is a masterpiece of a show. It follows the misadventures of regular old boy Morty and his genius grandpa Rick as they go through life in the most outrageous ways possible. This show is funny, clever, raunchy, and every other adjective in the book. They raise the bar on what animation can do, and then they go above it. It's hard to explain without seeing it firsthand, but the things they manage to do in the show are just bizarre and fun. The possibility for what can be made into a story in the show is literally limitless. To put it another way, I wish I had a fraction of the creativity that the creators of the show have. From the characters to the design, this show just works. It works, and everybody knows it does. Please watch Rick and Morty. And finally, number 1, Steven Universe. This is currently my number 1 favorite cartoon, and it's probably my favorite show at all. Steven Universe does everything perfectly. Every character, every detail, every frame seems to be graced by some entertainment deity. Steven Universe follows Steven, who is part human, in part crystal gem. He is living with, and I guess you could say training with, the other crystal gems, garnet, amethyst, and pearl. There's so much to cover story-wise though, I think I'm just gonna have to leave it at that. The show highlights emotion really well. It can make you feel happy, sad, and angry all in the same episode. The show, at its start, is lighthearted, childish, and a little bit simple, which is honestly still great. But I beg you not to leave it at that. As the show progresses, it slowly builds development. The story and lore of the gems quickly become much more interesting, complex, and impactful. As of right now, I am more enthralled with the Steven Universe story than anything else. And the hilarious part about it is that the episodes are only 11 minutes long. It is so digestible, yet it can still be dug deep for finer story elements. Now, to be honest, the first few episodes are kinda lame. I was kinda confused by what everyone saw in this show. I mean, it was okay, but the show itself from a distance can be seen as just yet another random silly cartoon. But anyone who continues to watch the show will be hit by a roller coaster of narrative that I personally hope will just keep going for a long time. I still don't think I've done Steven Universe justice in describing how great it is. Nor have I really done it for any of these personally, I think, but that is my top 10 favorite cartoons. Now, I know there are some other shows that I hear are really incredible, but I just haven't seen that much of them, or at all of them, and that is the only reason I have no opinion on them, but I'm planning on seeing them eventually. Other than that, tell me your thoughts of my list, or of your favorite shows that I didn't list anywhere on this that I should check out. Also, tell me if you want me to keep doing these lazy list vlogs. I don't know if they're good or not. Like and subscribe if you want to see more. I tend to do MLP and other media reviews and discussions on this channel. I'm Flake Hollow, and I hope you have a nice day.